Senator John Kennedy asked Chuck Schumer one direct question about fentanyl deaths, and Schumer froze, live on camera, with no answer ready. It was a bipartisan press briefing. Flags behind them, cameras in front, talking points loaded. Then Kennedy stepped forward. Not scheduled, not expected. He didn't raise his voice. He just turned to Schumer and said, "What's your plan for the border? That isn't just a press release?" Schumer blinked, paused, and for nearly 10 seconds, in front of every major network, he said nothing. The silence hit harder than a headline, because America wasn't watching a debate. They were watching a moment of exposure. Comment your city plus age. This one's about the numbers no one wants to say out loud. It was supposed to be a simple press conference, a bipartisan show of force on infrastructure reform, or at least that's what the official schedule said. Senator Chuck Schumer stood center stage, flanked by senior Democratic leadership and a few strategically invited Republicans. Behind them, a neat row of American flags, cameras front and center, boom mics dangling just above their heads, dozens of reporters lining the velvet rope. Everyone had been briefed. 10 minutes of remarks, 5 minutes of questions. Stay on message, no surprises. But Senator John Kennedy hadn't been in the pre-brief. He wasn't listed as a speaker. He hadn't submitted prepared remarks. In fact, most assumed he'd left the building after casting a vote earlier that morning, until he reappeared, binder in hand, glasses off, walking straight toward the podium. Schumer was mid-sentence. This bill represents a new era of targeted funding, fair priorities, and bipartisan compromise. Kennedy stepped onto the riser and waited patiently. A few reporters turned, confused. Schumer finished the line, looked to his left, and there stood Kennedy, hands folded, expression unreadable. "Chuck," Kennedy said, quiet but clear, "I know infrastructure's the theme of the day, but since we've got the cameras on, I've got a question." There was a pause. Schumer chuckled lightly, trying to diffuse. "Always good to have a surprise guest." "Not a guest," Kennedy replied, "a senator. And I think the American people would prefer answers to rehearsals." That line landed. The press perked up. Schumer nodded slowly, then said, "Go ahead." And Kennedy did. He didn't clear his throat, didn't flip through the binder. He just asked, "Since 2010, over 210,000 Americans have died from fentanyl overdoses, mostly from substances trafficked across the southern border. What specifically is your office's strategy to reduce those crossings, beyond tweets and condemnations?" Silence. Schumer blinked. Twice. Behind him, aides subtly shifted. The flags didn't move. Neither did Schumer, because the question wasn't just sharp, it was clean. No snark, no spin, just the raw math of death and responsibility. 210,000 deaths. One Senate Majority Leader. Zero immediate reply. Reporters' eyes darted from Kennedy's steady expression to Schumer's frozen one. Because this wasn't just a confrontation. It was a hole in the script. No talking point ready. No pivot prepared. Just a question everyone knew was coming, but no one had rehearsed. Schumer reached for the mic again. Stopped. Then reached into his jacket pocket. Pulled out a folded sheet. Started reading stats from a Homeland Security summary on border surveillance funding. Kennedy let him, didn't interrupt, didn't smile, just listened. Then when Schumer finished, "That's a list of technologies," Kennedy said. "I asked for a strategy." The silence that followed, it wasn't awkward, it was historic, because in that moment, on live camera, the most powerful Democrat in the Senate had no plan for the deadliest crisis unfolding on his watch. Kennedy reached into his binder. Slowly, carefully. No dramatics, just precision. What he pulled out was one sheet, stiff cardboard backing, laminated face, labeled in black ink at the top. Fentanyl overdose deaths in the U.S. in 2015 to 2024. The chart was brutal. A red line sloping gently upward through 2016, then spiking violently by 2021, and continuing to rise through the most recent data. No dips, no plateaus, just a relentless climb. "I had my staff gather this from CDC and DHS sources," Kennedy said, holding it forward. Every dot is 1,000 American deaths. Red dots. He held it up so the cameras could zoom in. This, he said calmly, is what failure looks like. Schumer looked at it, didn't reach for it, didn't dispute it. He just nodded once, slightly, and looked at the reporters. But Kennedy wasn't finished. He pointed to the sharpest part of the incline. 2021. This jump? That's when China resumed precursor exports, and the cartels in Mexico found new routes. You knew that. We all did. He looked Schumer directly in the eyes. So again, I'll ask, what's the plan? Schumer stepped up to the mic. This time he tried strength. We've supported historic funding to strengthen customs and border protection. Kennedy held up his hand. That's not a plan. That's a purchase. Schumer blinked. We've passed legislation to penalize synthetic opioid manufacturing abroad. And the result? Kennedy cut in. Cartels just moved distribution inland. They're in Tucson now. They're in Kansas. They're in Pittsburgh. Kennedy flipped the chart. On the back, a map. Dozens of red dots. Not along the southern border, but across middle America. He held it up again. This isn't just a border crisis anymore. It's a national infiltration. Every congressional district has felt it. Yours, mine, all of them. One reporter positioned at stage right raised a hand. Senator Schumer, do you classify the fentanyl crisis as a national security threat? Schumer opened his mouth, stopped, closed it again. We treat it as a major public health issue with law enforcement components. Kennedy stepped closer. You won't say it, will you? Schumer looked up. Say what? The word. Call it what it is. Not an issue, not a challenge, not a concern. Kennedy pointed back at the chart. Say it's an invasion. The word cut the air like a blade, not because it was controversial, but because it was true. And everyone watching, from the Senate floor to the living rooms across America, felt it. Schumer didn't say the word. He shifted, looked down, looked at his team. And that was all it took, because in that 10-second pause, a whole country saw what leadership should look like and what happens when it's absent. The word was never officially spoken into the mic, but it didn't have to be. Within minutes of Kennedy's quiet challenge, say it's an invasion, the clip was already online. Someone in the press gallery had clipped it, uploaded it to X, and captioned it simply, Kennedy to Schumer, call it what it is. No music, no graphics, just raw footage of a calm Louisiana senator pointing at a map of overdose deaths and a Senate Majority Leader speechless in front of him. The video passed 1 million views in under an hour. By nightfall, it had crossed 12 million. On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow tried to spin it. It's irresponsible and inflammatory for Senator Kennedy to use that kind of language when discussing drug policy. But she never played the full clip. On Fox News, Tucker Carlson didn't need to. He let the footage roll. No chyron, no interruption, just the question and the silence that followed. Tucker finally looked into the camera. That's what exposure looks like. No yelling, no showboating. Just one man asking another to tell the American people the truth. The comment section across platforms turned brutal, not toward Kennedy, but toward every politician who ducked the same question for years. I lost my brother to fentanyl. I don't want plans. I want action. My son was 19, dead in 12 minutes. Schumer had no answer. Finally, someone says the word. It's a war, and no one in D.C. wants to admit it. By midnight, the White House had issued a generic statement. It was 3 paragraphs long. It didn't mention Kennedy, didn't mention Schumer, didn't use the word fentanyl until the 3rd sentence, and it landed flat. Meanwhile, Kennedy, he went quiet again. No tweet, no fundraiser, just a short interview outside a Senate office. I didn't plan to speak today, he said, but I've seen too many letters from parents in my district, too many funerals in counties no one campaigns in. A reporter asked, do you think calling it an invasion is appropriate? Kennedy didn't hesitate. If another country killed 70,000 Americans a year, we'd call that war. If we let cartels do it, and don't call it anything, that's surrender. That quote lit up the bottom thirds of every news network. Kennedy, this isn't policy failure. This is surrender. And behind the scenes, Senate staffers scrambled, phones lit up, emails flew, not because they disagreed with him, but because they realized he had just reset the national tone. For years, fentanyl had been treated like a sad side plot, a tragic statistic buried under immigration debates and healthcare squabbles. But now it had a face, it had a voice, and it had a question no one else had dared to ask. What do you call it when a poison crosses your border and kills your people by the tens of thousands, and your leaders do nothing? 2 days later, the cameras were gone. No risers, no reporters, just a small subcommittee hearing buried on the Senate calendar. Drug trafficking impact assessment on Midwestern districts. 6 senators present, half of them on their phones, until Kennedy walked in. Not with a binder this time, but with a single legal pad, yellow and creased. He took his seat, waited. And then, when it was his turn to speak, he didn't address the witnesses. He addressed the record. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read something into the congressional record. Proceed, said the chair. Kennedy cleared his throat, then began. Andrew, 22, Lafayette Parish, Louisiana, died in his apartment from a pill he thought was Xanax. Lab confirmed it was 80% fentanyl. He flipped a page. Brielle, 18, Jefferson County, Kentucky, honor roll student, bought 1 Percocet on Snapchat, dead before her parents got home. Another page. Marcus, 17, Boone, Iowa, took half a pill at a house party. His mother found him in the backyard. Paramedics arrived too late. The room changed, phones dropped, chairs shifted. The silence turned from inattentive to gutted. Because Kennedy wasn't reading numbers. He was reading names. And not of addicts, not of criminals, not of repeat offenders. Kids, athletes, sons, daughters. 38 names in total. Each with a hometown, each with a cause of death, each a story that never made the front page. These aren't overdoses, Kennedy said softly. They're poisonings. The intent was recreation. The result was death. 1 senator wiped their eyes. A staffer stepped out of the room. Kennedy flipped the pad closed. These names, they're not in your annual reports. They're not on the campaign trail. But they're in graves, and they're in my mailbox. He paused. If a terrorist group sent this much poison into our schools, we'd have troops on the ground. But because it's smugglers, we send tweets. No one clapped. This wasn't a floor speech. It was a confession of governmental failure. Then Kennedy looked straight at the witness panel, agents from DEA, CBP, and Health and Human Services. Can any of you name one federal official who's been fired or demoted over fentanyl response delays in the last 3 years? No one raised a hand. Then maybe that's the problem. That line didn't make the evening news. It wasn't loud enough. But inside that room, something snapped. Because Kennedy hadn't embarrassed anyone. He just held up a mirror and forced the people running the system to see the kids it failed. It happened in a CNN sit-down. Schumer hadn't planned to address the Kennedy moment again. Not after the viral clip, not after the headlines, and definitely not after the photo of him looking frozen became an internet meme. But Anderson Cooper brought it up anyway. Senator, I want to go back to the exchange with Senator Kennedy. He asked you to call the fentanyl crisis an invasion. Do you stand by your decision not to use that word? Schumer leaned back in the chair. His tie was loose. The lighting was tight. He didn't dodge. This time he answered. Look, Anderson, I'll say it now. Yes, it's an invasion, not just of drugs, but of trauma, of loss, of fear. The room didn't explode. There was no applause because the truth, he was too late. The country had already moved. Kennedy had lit the match. The map had gone viral. Parents had flooded social media with names. College kids had held vigils. Small-town papers had run obituaries side by side with congressional voting records. The moment Schumer could have led, it passed when he froze on live TV. And now this sentence, this half-hearted redemption line, felt like what it was. A reaction, not a response. The internet noticed. Clips of Schumer's CNN answer were uploaded, but the comments weren't kind. Oh, now he says it? We needed this energy 2 years ago. Kennedy made the case. Schumer just read the room. Even his allies felt the shift. One Democratic strategist anonymously told Politico, "Chuck's good at legislative maneuvering, but moments like this, you need instinct." He blinked. Meanwhile, Kennedy didn't comment. When a Hill reporter asked if he had seen Schumer's CNN clip, Kennedy replied, "I'm more interested in the folks still burying their kids. The terminology game? That's Washington's favorite distraction." And that's why his words stuck, and Schumer's faded. Because Kennedy never tried to win Twitter. He wasn't performing. He was pointing at numbers, at names, at the reality no briefing paper could dress up. Later that week, Kennedy gave a closed-door talk to a group of high school seniors visiting the Capitol. No cameras, no staffers, just one student asked, "Why do you always sound so calm when you say tough things?" Kennedy smiled, then answered, "Because if the numbers are real, I don't need to shout." That was it, the whole lesson, and the exact reason why one question in a press briefing was cut deeper than a decade of policy panels. 4 weeks after the press conference that lit up the nation, a new bill appeared in the Senate log. No flashy rollout, no joint announcement, just a quiet filing under the name, the Borderline Accountability and Fentanyl Enforcement Act. Author, Senator John Kennedy. Co-sponsors, a cross-section of Republicans and 2 Democrats. The bill was short, just 12 pages, but every line was sharp. Immediate reclassification of fentanyl precursors as Category 1 threats. Emergency border designation allowing for deployment of federal tactical resources. Visa restrictions for chemical exporters in non-cooperative foreign jurisdictions. A federal database tracking synthetic opioid overdoses. By zip code. The message was simple. Track the poison. Stop the flow. Call it what it is. Reporters caught wind quickly. But what they noticed wasn't just the content. It was the absence. Chuck Schumer's name wasn't on the bill. Not as a co-sponsor, not as a procedural backer, not even as a public supporter. When asked if Schumer had been consulted, Kennedy's office gave a one-sentence reply. The majority leader was informed. His office did not respond. That detail traveled faster than the bill summary, because the question on everyone's mind now wasn't what's in the bill. It was why the man who finally said invasion still wouldn't act like it. Back channels buzzed. Some said Schumer was waiting to bundle the proposal into a broader package. Others claimed he was avoiding further credit to Kennedy. A few insiders whispered that Schumer simply didn't want to be seen following. But to everyday Americans, it just looked like stalling. In Ohio, a grieving mother posted a photo of her 16-year-old son, captioned it, "He didn't need a talking point. He needed protection." She tagged both senators. Kennedy responded with a DM. Schumer never did. The New York Times ran a headline that stunned even Capitol Hill. One senator acts, another waits. Fentanyl crisis enters a political vacuum. Kennedy didn't comment, but his bill picked up steam, quietly, steadily. 5 more senators signed on. Local law enforcement groups endorsed it. Even 2 governors, one red state, one blue, voiced public support. Still, Schumer stayed silent. And in that silence, the entire country saw how real leadership echoes and how political hesitation leaves caskets closed. He wasn't a lobbyist, wasn't a staffer, didn't wear a suit, didn't have an appointment. He wore jeans, a windbreaker, and carried a plastic folder with one item inside. A photo of his son, 19 years old, baseball scholarship. Found in his dorm, dead from a counterfeit painkiller, 94% fentanyl. The father had driven 12 hours straight from rural Arkansas. Didn't sleep, didn't shower. Just parked his truck outside the Capitol and walked in with a visitor pass printed at the kiosk. No TV crew followed him, but one intern noticed. And that intern led him upstairs. Kennedy had just stepped out of a Judiciary Committee markup. His staffer whispered something in his ear. He turned, saw the man, and before the man could even speak, "You're here about your boy?" Kennedy asked. The man nodded. No tears, just held out the photo. Kennedy took it with both hands. Didn't rush, didn't look away. "His name?" Kennedy asked softly. "Eli." Kennedy studied the face, young, laughing, wearing a high school letter jacket. Then the father finally spoke. I don't need a speech. I don't need a promise. I just need someone to not forget his name when they vote. Kennedy nodded once. He's already in the record. He's one of the 38 I read last week. The father's lips trembled, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Relief that someone had already carried his grief into the chamber. Kennedy shook his hand. No cameras, no post, no press release. Later that day, the father passed Schumer's office, stopped, stared at the plaque, then walked on. Didn't knock, didn't ask, because he already knew. Schumer had said the word once, but he hadn't shown up when it counted. And that was the answer. Across the country, people kept watching the clip of Kennedy's question. Some forwarded it to their families. Some played it in schools. Some printed the chart and hung it on community center walls. Not because they were political, but because they were desperate. And for once, someone had spoken the crisis plainly. No jargon, no fluff, no fear. Just a senator standing in front of cameras, asking why American kids were dying, while politicians kept passing the mic. If more leaders had the courage to ask the question Kennedy did, and not freeze, hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from.